All right, in this section, we're going to talk a lot about social behaviors and how our own behaviors or anyone's behavior might be affected by others, either being in the presence of them or different situational components as well. So let's go ahead and jump in. First, we'll talk about social norms. And so generally speaking about this, we can look at how our own behaviors are affected by different social norms. So generally speaking, different cultures, different organizations, different groups of people have general norms that they tend to agree upon that are acceptable behaviors to perform. And so our thoughts, our behaviors, all of these things are affected by the cultural, larger context of what our society agrees is okay and is a normal way to think and behave. We can see some distinctions here just in different cultures and how this takes place, where we see more individualistic cultures happening more over in the US and Canada versus more collectivist cultures in some of the Eastern countries like China and Japan. Now we're going to talk about a few studies here that kind of go into some interesting social behaviors. And the first one we're going to talk about is this idea of conformity. So I love this study. This is a really cool study looking at social conformity and seeing how people interact and might change their beliefs just simply based on what other people are saying or doing. Solomon Asch looked at conformity and he studied this in a really interesting way. So you can see the image above me here shows a series of different lines. And so what they did is they had a group of people and they asked them to report which of the lines of the comparison lines on the right matched the length of the standard line on the left. And so if you looked at this right away, it should be pretty easy to identify that line number 2 is the line that is the same length as the standard line. However, what they did is they took a group of Confederates or people that were in on the experiment and had them act as participants. And so this whole group would provide the wrong answer deliberately. And then they had one person in the group that was a true participant that they would observe and see if that participant conformed with the wrong answers of the group. And what was really interesting to see is that about 35% of participants always conformed with the group. So even if the answer was obviously wrong, they would conform with the group. And even about 75% of participants conformed at least once to obviously wrong answers. And so I love this study because it really just highlights the strength of this social conformity phenomenon and looks to see how this can strengthen and how much we are really biased to conform or go along in this social group. The next phenomenon we'll talk about is this idea of groupthink. And groupthink is really kind of a dangerous phenomenon that happens in social psychology. And it's this idea that basically going along with the group, sort of like social conformity, happens even in important or dangerous context. So what happens here is that people overestimate the thought process of the group and go along with the groupthink, or what the group is sort of unanimously agreeing upon. Now, what's dangerous here and where this causes problems is when an individual might identify something that is contradictory to what the group as a whole has been thinking or has identified. And so some examples of this are examples like the Challenger explosion, which you can see up above me. Here in this case, it was identified that there were problems by a small group of people, but this information went against the larger group who thought that everything was safe and sound and ready to go. Obviously, the small section of individuals who identified the problem were correct, but they weren't able to sort of stand up, or the group as a whole didn't put emphasis into those problems that they identified. And so we can see here that we get these ideas like pressure for uniformity or just pressure to go along with the group, even when smaller information might be more accurate. Another famous example here is looking at obedience to authority specifically. So a famous study looking at obedience is the Milgram study. And in this study, what they did is they took a group of participants and they looked to see if they would obey an authority figure, even if that authority figure was telling them to do dangerous or harmful things to another person. And so if we look at the layout of the study here, we can see E for experimenter, T for teacher, and L for learner here. And so what we can see here is that we have the experimenter here, who is actually the researcher conducting the experiment and is dressed in an authority sort of figure's outfit as the experimenter telling the participants what to do. We then have the teacher over here, and the teacher is actually the one true participant. This is the person that's actually being studied and observed to see what they do and how their behavior takes place. And then down here on the bottom, we have the learner, who the participants think is another participant, but is actually a confederate or someone who's involved in the study and acting in a specific way. And so what the teacher here, again, sort of the true participant, what they believe is going on is that they are teaching the learner to remember a series of pieces of information. And when the learner gets an answer wrong, the teacher is supposed to administer a series of electric shocks. Now, they're not actually administering shocks, but they don't know that because the learner is providing a scripted series of responses back, like screaming, yelling, or saying, "Ow, that hurts." And eventually they even stop responding entirely. However, the experimenter continues to tell the teacher or the participant to continue administering these electric shocks. And so what we're looking to see, or what they were looking to see, is how much that teacher, that participant, obeyed authority and continued administering electric shocks even when they got to dangerous levels. And what they found was interesting. You can actually see the series of boxes here and the series of shocks as they increase. And they found that quite a few number of people obeyed authority and did, in fact, administer these electric shocks even up to potentially lethal doses. Again, they weren't actually administering shocks, but they didn't know that. And this really kind of demonstrated and highlighted this challenge for authority and obedience. Another example here of social psychology and the dangers sort of obedience is in the Zimbardo prison experiments. Here, Philip Zimbardo studied the outcomes of playing different roles in a simulated prison experiment. So some participants were playing the role of prisoners and some participants were playing the role of guards in this prison. And what ended up happening actually was the experiment was designed to span a period of 2 weeks, but actually had to be stopped early after only about 6 days. And this was due to the fact that they actually started behaving in extreme ways. So the guards would behave in extreme sort of aggressive manners to the prisoners, and the prisoners would kind of respond to that as well. And the situation sort of just got out of hand, and these normal people, these normal participants who were taking part in the study sort of just became too engrossed in these roles and things got too extreme. And so the experiment was ended, and it really kind of highlighted the power of the situation or the power of the roles that someone can play in these contexts. While this was a simulated study, of course, it kind of showed and demonstrated in the real world, people in these roles take on these different actions and these different beliefs and behaviors of the roles themselves.